After my top 10 most hated Pokemon, I receive a lot of comments saying, wow, how can this Pokemon get hate while all the first gen Pokemon go unnoticed for how bad some of them are? Ugh, nostalgia. So to balance that out, and since we haven't had a top 10 worst in a while, I thought we'd look at the top 10 worst Gen 1 Pokemon. Now, while I say these are the worst, keep in mind there are many reasons, and it does not mean that these are bad Pokemon, it's just simply that they have some negative traits that may push them below other Pokemon. That being said, like any generation, there will always be Pokemon who are worse than others for varying reasons, and today, we'll be looking at some of those. I like to mention that my criteria for this list are encounters, design, and personality, because the majority of how you experience Pokemon is usually through playthroughs of the game. I'll also try and put something positive about each Pokemon, because even though I may be saying a Pokemon is bad, there are usually still good things about them. Most of the time. Welcome to my top 10 worst Gen 1 Pokemon. Don't hate me, please. I even said please. Number 10, Suckle. Great design take on a jellyfish. It had an awesome evolution that's even a fun special wall to mess with in battles, but it's an absolutely horrible Pokemon to run into when surfing. I mentioned Zubat as a Pokemon that people hate to run into because you see it all the time, but Tentacool. Oh, Tentacool. Sure, it's always annoying to constantly run into the same Pokemon over and over, but Tentacool had one special thing about him in the first generation. That was rap. If you were out surfing, not only would you probably run into a bunch of wild Tentacool because you might not have had enough room for repels due to the limit of 20 items in your bag, but almost every trainer out there had at least one Tentacool on their team. And if you got hit by a rap, over and over, you're gonna be stuck there for 20 minutes because you were not allowed to do anything while you were getting hit by a rap. Sorry, I got a little wrapped up in the moment. Number 9, Geodude. Did anyone notice Geodude's name is essentially Rock Dude? Just throwing that out there. It is hard for me to put Geodude on this list, what with my love for Golem and all the wonderful times you saw Brock's Geodude in the anime, but it's just a floating rock that has a face and arms attached to it. I do like Geodude, but you have to admit his popularity and the love he gets is mostly because of the anime. It just feels like such an uninspired design when you really look into it. And while I do feel bad about saying that, I think he deserves this spot on the list. Sorry, dude. Number 8, Jinx. While I don't hate Jinx, I do admit that there are some negative qualities about her. I've generally never been a big fan of these types of humanoid Pokemon, and I think that feeling is pretty common amongst most people when the Pokemon are just way too human looking. For example, Pokemon like Alakazam and Hitmonchan are classified as humanoid. However, they just feel like Pokemon. Whereas Jinx, not as much. I mean, just look at it. Jinx is the human-shaped Pokemon, for some reason. She's not particularly good-looking, in that she actually looks like she was made to be purposely ugly. She just feels completely separate from most Pokemon in this generation. She also doesn't really fit a particular purpose besides, hey, here's this thing. Alright. Not to mention, I have no idea how she's an ice type. Psychic? Fine. She's a witch, I guess. But ice? Is it because she freezes my heart to near lethal levels with just a look? I don't get it. Number 7, Muck. Alright, so I'm gonna use this segment to go over the whole Garbodor versus Muck debate, while still giving my explanation for Muck. Firstly, Trubbish is an amazingly designed Pokemon. It's not overdone, they use the garbage bag ties for ears, little bits of garbage spilling out for hands, and it's cute for trash. The problem is, Garbodor is a little over-designed, where they should have stopped putting stuff into him 5 minutes into the design process, but instead kept trying to make him look too grotesque and went past the right kind of subtle appeal they usually have with these kind of Pokemon. So now let's compare that to Muck. Muck is literally a pile of sludge with a face on it, and that's it. I mean, most of the very simple Pokemon are amazing because there isn't a lot of things to get in the way of putting your imagination and thought into Pokemon. So you could think, oh, Muck is this mischievous guy, slithering around having fun with his Grimer buddies, and it would make him a much more appealing Pokemon since there wasn't all this stuff to get in the way of your imagination. That's what Muck did well, but he's still a pile of sludge with a face on it. I love the whole air, ground, and water pollution trio, but he's still a pile of sludge with a face on it. At the very least, I have to commend Game Freak for having Garbodor look different when it evolves from Trubbish, because, well, Grimer and Muck, they just added a little more sludge and changed up his face a bit. So all in all, I give the slight edge to Muck over Garbodor, whereas Trubbish is leagues ahead of Grimer. However, it still remains that Muck is one of the worst Pokemon in the first generation. Number 6. Chansey. So while I did mention Chansey before, I just want to reiterate why she's one of the worst Pokemon in the first generation. While Chansey is a cool Pokemon, you just can't let go of all those times you got stalled out by one in battles. With her status-inflicting moves, ways to heal up, and bulky stats, she was quite possibly one of the worst Pokemon to run into. On top of the fact that not only was catching her in the Safari Zone a pain, she was also just plain hard to find there. Number 5. Seel. So I want to make sure to be as thorough as possible with this one. The reason Seel happens to be one of the worst Pokemon is because, well, it's just a seal. Not much changes with him. He's just a regular animal whose name says exactly what it is. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, other Pokemon are just regular animals that are changed. What's the difference? Well, with Pokemon that are just regular animals, there's always feelings set forth. Whether it be through encounters, little changes in their design, or generally having just that little something to differentiate from a regular animal while still keeping true and not overdoing it. Someone like Persian is just a cat, but you can feel that evil, mischievous presence from its design. A sort of confidence that reigns from this Pokemon because of how well they push Persian's bond with Giovanni in games like Pokemon Yellow and Pokemon Stadium. Even though Persian wasn't with Giovanni in Red and Blue or Heart Gold and Soul Silver, you could still feel that evil presence and bond was taken into consideration from the way Persian's design progressed. It has this confident, evil look, along with that menacing gem in its head and its sleek design that was straightforward enough for you to interpret all of this. These choices, both design and encounters, help to push a personality into just a regular drawing of a cat. But Seel just didn't really have any of that. I do love Seel, and I love his design because it isn't overdone, but if someone showed me another cute drawing of a Seel, the only difference would really be the fact that one's in a Pokemon game. And to be fair, if they swapped the two pictures, it would leave me feeling the same. There just doesn't feel as though there's a unique presence with Seel. He's just a silly Seel and could probably be improved or swapped. To top it off, again, his name is Seel. It's a seal, and his name is Seel. I can't wait for some Gen 1 DLC Pokemon like Bird and Styrofoam Cup. Number 4. Tangela. For some reason it autocorrected to Tangela. Is that a name? I think that's a name. Tangela has been somewhat of a forgotten Pokemon in the first generation, because it's just kinda there and overshadowed by a bunch of great grass types. I mean, I get it. It's a bunch of tangle vines with shoes? Great, thanks. It didn't even evolve until the 4th generation, and it just got bigger. I mean, it has somewhat decent defense and special attack for a stage 1 Pokemon, but I don't get it. It's just kinda there, reminding me how my earphones look after I perfectly placed them in my pocket. How did you get tangled again? Number 3. Dugtrio. This remains as possibly one of the least creative Pokemon evolutions in the first generation. While Dugtrio has some good stats and is well placed for you to be able to catch one so you can sweep the 3rd gym, Dugtrio is just 3 Digletts. Digletts are cool. I even like Dugtrio because it's okay, but you have to admit, it's just 3 Diglett friends in a group saying, you know, I bet we could trick this human into thinking we're an evolution. I know there's a lot of Pokemon like Doduo and Magnemite who just kinda add another thing, but at least with those, they have something that's a little different. Dodrio adds some nice designs, like its new tail, eyes, feathers, and even has this whole fun, different personality for each head gimmick. And Magneton, well, it's a bunch of magnets that got stuck together. It's a pretty funny evolution. But Dugtrio, it's just some moles. I mean, I love that they're close enough to be best buds and stick together through thick and thin, but they don't even change in look besides getting a little bigger. Number 2. Electrode. Let's start with the positives. Get it? Because positive electrical currents. And Electrode is positive while Voltorb is negative. At least I think that's the whole point of why Voltorb is angry and why Electrode is happy. Anyways, the lore is cool. The problem with Electrode is mostly due to the fact that it's a ball with a face. Now that's fine, we have a lot of Pokemon that are just different takes on animals or adding faces to stuff, but when it evolves from Voltorb, it only gets bigger, and its colors swap places. Not to mention the fact that both Voltorb and Electrode have self-destruct, and are very fast. So in the event that you might run into a shiny version of one of these guys, you'll probably go boom, and you'll cry. Just a little. I do, however, like the whole theory behind Voltorb being a Pokeball possessed by Haunter, but the overall lacking design and annoying features like Shiny Go Boom end up putting these guys on the list. Number 1. Mr. Mime. It is rather interesting to base a Pokemon off of a mime. That's definitely a different subject to use for a Pokemon design. But, you know, it's still a pretty creepy one. I made most of my points about humanoid Pokemon with Jinx, and they still reign true for Mr. Mime, but even more so. Mr. Mime just feels so separate from all the other Pokemon, almost like he was designed with a different purpose in mind. In the first generation, you couldn't even encounter him in the wild. You had to trade with an in-game character to even get one, which made it feel like they couldn't figure out where he would even fit. His design just feels like a different art style in comparison, and while it is a creative subject, the general execution makes him stick out in a less than ideal way. At least he had a fun minigame in Pokemon Stadium too. Also, are those just his shoes or do his toes curl up? I don't know what's going on there. Well, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and sorry if some of these are your favorites. You know, this kinda happens when you make a top 10 worst list, but it's all for fun. If you thought I forgot anyone, please let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. See you all next time for some more Pokemon Top 10s.